Just 47 seconds. That's how long Marcus stared into that room, but those 47 seconds would shake a $300 billion empire, change thousands of lives, and transform a homeless child into the world's youngest millionaire. This is the story of that moment. On a cold December night in Chicago, in one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods, the lights of a massive mansion were going out one by one. Alexander Kane's 47-room estate looked peaceful from the outside, but inside, 12-year-old Marcus Williams clutched a damp cleaning cloth in his small hands as he wiped down the corridors, unable to hide the uneasiness in his heart. Marcus's story had begun 3 months earlier. After escaping from social services, he'd been fighting for survival in Chicago's cold streets. His eyes held that deep expression that children who've seen too much possess. His black hair was messy, his clothes worn, but the flame of hope still burned within him. Alexander Kane was America's youngest self-made billionaire. At just 34, he'd built a $300 billion fortune through his tech company, Kane Industries. The media portrayed him as the philanthropic genius of the modern world. His anti-poverty campaigns, children's aid funds, and centers for street children had earned him a perfect public image. But to Marcus, Kane was just an employer. For $50 a day, he cleaned this enormous house during the night hours. When Kane traveled for business, Marcus would work in the mansion without anyone knowing, disappearing before dawn. Tonight was no different. Kane was at a business meeting in New York. Marcus followed his usual routine. He cleaned the kitchen, swept the living rooms, then headed upstairs. When he reached Kane's library, he paused. This room had always fascinated him. Massive bookshelves, antique furniture, expensive paintings on the walls. But tonight he noticed something different. On the wall behind the bookshelf, there was a crack so thin it was barely visible. Light was seeping through this crack. Marcus's heart began beating rapidly. Curious, he approached the crack and pressed gently. Nothing happened. When he pressed a bit harder, the wall silently slid open, revealing a passage. The interior was a dimly lit room. Marcus stuck his head in, and what he saw would freeze him in place. Hundreds of children's photos hung on the walls. Below each was a name, age, and address, and stamped in large red letters, "Missing." With trembling hands, he stepped into the room. The large desk in the center was covered with files. When he opened the first one, his breath caught. Under the heading, Street Children Cleanup Project Phase 1 Completed, were dozens of children's photos and personal information. As he flipped through the pages, horrifying truths began to emerge. The real plan behind Kane's charitable projects was shocking. The children's aid centers were actually target identification centers. He was systematically identifying poor children, separating them from their families, and making them disappear. Each document Marcus discovered among the files deepened his horror. A secret division of Kane's company had been running this operation for years. Targeted children were first taken from foster families, then erased from the record systems, as if they had never existed. And then he experienced the biggest shock. In the bottom drawer of the desk, he found his own file. Marcus Williams, target number 1247. It contained his own photo, address information, and most terrifyingly, a note reading, "Elimination date, December 15th. That date was tomorrow. His file contained detailed information, how he was found, his daily routines, his weaknesses, and at the very end, a note. All social records to be completely erased. No traces to be left. Marcus was closing the file with trembling hands when he heard a voice behind him. "I think you arrived ahead of schedule, Marcus." He turned to see Alexander Kane standing in the doorway. There was a cold smile on Kane's face. "I thought you were on a business trip," Marcus whispered. "Trip was canceled, and you shouldn't be here." Khan said, slowly entering the room. Marcus looked around desperately. Cain had trapped him between himself and the walls. But at that moment, something among the files caught his eye. Next to his own file sat a USB drive. "I see you've discovered our project," Cain said. "In that case, we'll have to move up the timeline." "Why?" Marcus asked, trying to gather his courage. Cain laughed bitterly. "Because there are too many of you people in this world. You dirty the streets. You create unnecessary burdens on the system. I'm simply doing cleanup." "But you said you were doing charity." "Charity!" Cain burst into laughter. "How easily the stupid media is fooled, right? I'm cleaning this city, Marcus, and you're my final target." As Cain approached, a crazy plan began forming in Marcus's mind. He needed to reach that USB drive. Maybe these documents could serve as evidence. "No one will look for you, Marcus, because you already don't exist. You don't appear in the records. Perfect system, isn't it?" During this, Marcus managed to grab the USB drive and slip it into his pocket. Cain hadn't noticed yet. "But you made one mistake," Marcus said, trying to make his voice sound strong. "What mistake?" "I'm not alone." Cain was surprised. "What do you mean?" Marcus smiled. "Before coming here, I photographed the documents I found and sent them to a friend. If he doesn't hear from me within 24 hours, he'll give everything to the police." This was a lie, of course. Marcus had no such friend, but from the expression on Cain's face, he could tell the lie was effective. "You're lying." "Am I? Do you want to take that risk?" Cain hesitated. Marcus seized this moment to start running toward the door. Cain shouted after him, but Marcus had already disappeared into the corridor. He ran out of the mansion and continued running through the cold night. The USB drive in his pocket was the key to justice for hundreds of children. The next morning, Marcus sent the documents from the USB to all media outlets. When Cain's true face was revealed, America was shocked. The FBI sprang into action, Cain was arrested, and Marcus suddenly became the world's most famous child. As Cain's fortune was distributed to victim families through judicial processes, Marcus became an important part of this process. In time, he used this money to establish a foundation working for children's rights. Those 47 seconds had saved not just Marcus's life, but the lives of thousands of children. And homeless child Marcus Williams earned his place in history as the young hero who brought justice to the world. Because sometimes the biggest changes begin with the smallest discoveries. And courage isn't measured by age, but by the power to listen to your heart's voice. The cold Chicago wind that night carried more than just winter's chill. It carried the whispers of change. In the weeks that followed, as investigators combed through Cain's elaborate network of deception, they discovered a conspiracy that stretched far beyond one man's twisted vision. The truth was even more devastating than Marcus had initially uncovered. Cain's operation wasn't just local. It was part of an international trafficking ring that had been operating for over a decade. The children who disappeared weren't just erased from records. Many were sold into labor markets across different states and countries. Marcus found himself at the center of the largest human trafficking investigation in U.S. history. Despite his young age, his testimony became crucial in bringing down not just Cain, but an entire network of criminals who had hidden behind philanthropic facades. The boy who once searched through garbage cans for food now found himself speaking before Congress, advocating for stronger protections for homeless and at-risk youth. His courage that night didn't just save his own life, it sparked a nationwide reform of the child welfare system. Cain's empire crumbled within months. His assets, frozen by federal authorities, were eventually liquidated to create the largest victim compensation fund in history. But more importantly, the Marcus Williams Child Protection Act was passed, requiring all charitable organizations working with children to undergo rigorous background checks and transparent auditing. Today, Marcus Williams runs the foundation that bears his name, but he hasn't forgotten his roots. Every night, teams funded by his organization patrol the streets of major cities, not to clean up as Cain had, but to offer genuine help, food, shelter, and hope to those who need it most. The 47 seconds that changed everything began with curiosity and ended with courage. And in those brief moments, a frightened child became a beacon of hope for thousands of others who had been forgotten by the world.